Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you to this press conference by Mr. Pierre Krähenbühl, UNRWA Commissioner General. I don't think I need to introduce you Mr. Krähenbühl, who has been appointed by the Secretary General in November 2013 as Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, which he became on 30th March 2014. I would like just to, first of all, remind you to put down your cell phone tones, and we will now listen to a first introduction by Mr. Krähenbühl, and then we will proceed to questions. Mr. Krähenbühl, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to address you briefly on UNRWA's work and situation. I'm in Geneva for a number of reasons. There's, first of all, this morning an executive briefing to the permanent missions present here in Geneva on UNRWA's both financial situation, our operational priorities for this year, and a specific launch of our emergency appeals, which I will come back to and address. But in overall terms, maybe let me begin by saying that, as you're aware, UNRWA was mandated in 1949 to serve a community of then 700,000 Palestinians who were driven from their homes and had to flee their homes in what is today the State of Israel. That was the original displacement and forced displacement of Palestinians from their villages. And today we have a registered community of over 5.3 million who live and survive and wait for a solution in what is today the West Bank, and including East Jerusalem, Gaza, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. Those are the areas where we are mandated to work, and we have been set up originally with a task to provide relief for this refugee community until a solution would be found to their situation. That solution, of course, has not been found. There is no political resolution of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, and therefore UNRWA continues its activities, and now almost 68 years later. We focus in our line of work on the provision of education services. We run 700 schools in the Near East for 525,000 Palestinian boys and girls, all refugees in the different areas that I just referred to. We carry out health care activities, primary health care, for 3 million patient visits a year, and other activities such as relief and social services, microfinance, and others. We then have, in addition to that, as a result of the very acute conflict that is underway and continues in Syria, where just under 500,000 Palestinian refugees survive in very difficult circumstances, and of course in Gaza and the West Bank, also emergency response, in addition to our quasi-state-like service delivery and education and healthcare. The emergency appeals that were presented this morning represent just over $400 million for Syria and just under $400 million for the West Bank and Gaza. Those are for emergency response, food, cash, additional emergency medical supplies, in particular also mental health support, and gender-based violence-related activities. So we have that range that we're, of course, appealing to the international community for response to. Now, just a word on the situation of Palestinian refugees throughout the region. The thing that I think is the most preoccupying when I look at the region, when I see Palestinian refugees that we support and assist, in particular also youth, is that there is a total absence of political horizon for anyone in the region. There is no serious process underway that would indicate any effort to bring an end to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And this, of course, creates great uncertainty, lack of clarity about what will happen. And when you combine it with the lack of personal horizon for so many Palestinian refugees, then you have a particularly delicate mix in the region. What do I mean by personal horizon? So let me give an example. For young people in the Gaza Strip, for example, where we have 270,000 students in UNRWA schools in the Gaza Strip alone. And over 90% of them have never left the Gaza Strip in their lives. So it is the region they are confined to. They have no freedom of movement. They also face the highest level of youth unemployment anywhere on the planet, with 65% of youth unemployment in the Gaza Strip. You have no doubt a time bomb in terms just simply of the pressures on the community. When you think of the accumulative impact in psychosocial terms of 3 wars in the recent decade, if you think of all of the constraints and the sense of deprivation that faces the community, you have what our colleagues in the health sector in the Gaza Strip call an epidemic deterioration of psychosocial conditions. And this is certainly, I cannot see in the interest of anybody at regional level to allow this to continue. So UNRWA is, of course, a key provider and of opportunities, a preservation of human development achievements and opportunities for Palestinian refugees, and as I said, of emergency response. But obviously, the fundamental issue that needs to be addressed is that of a political solution for the region. In developing and implementing our activities, UNRWA has 30,000 staff deployed through the region. 98% of them are Palestinian refugees themselves. They work in places like Aleppo, Homs, around Damascus, and Dera in Syria, in contexts as challenging as, of course, in the camps in Lebanon and in Jordan, but in particular also in the Gaza Strip. We lost 11 colleagues during the 2014 war in Gaza. That's 11 colleagues lost in a 50-day conflict. And we've lost 20 colleagues in Syria since the beginning of the war and have 25 who are missing. It's an incredibly high price for the implementation of absolutely indispensable humanitarian and development activities in the region. Now, in addition to the operational challenges, to the prospects for the community itself, and of course for UNRWA in terms of security and others, we face every year very significant financial challenges. And that is, on the one hand, part of the experience of almost every humanitarian agency. But this particular year, we have had a situation that was compounded by the decision by the United States to dramatically reduce their financial contribution. Last year, we obtained $360 million from the United States. This year, they announced $60 million. So evidently, that is a very severe and dramatic change in the parameters of funding from the United States, the country has been an absolute stable, predictable, and most generous contributor to UNRWA over decades. Has been the single largest donor to the agency for very, very many years, and where a consensus existed, bipartisan consensus, that whatever the disagreements and opinions there were on a bilateral level between the US and the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian leaderships, there would always be support to the refugee community. This element, of course, is now at risk and represents for UNRWA a very significant additional shortfall, which puts at risk, and where what is at stake is the access, as I said, of 500,000 boys and girls to education at a very time when everybody is concerned about further risks of radicalization in the Middle East, where, as I said, patients need to continue to obtain everything that they obtain in our clinics, from pre- and post-natal care to, of course, response to non-communicable diseases, psychosocial support and others, and then, of course, the emergency work that I just referred to. So it is clear that we have a very big task on our hand to fill that gap. To overcome this, it requires new funding alliances, both in the state community, and that's important because UNRWA was mandated by the international state community through the General Assembly, and of course also through the public at large. And we just launched an ambitious global campaign called Dignity is Priceless, with the objective of appealing to people of goodwill around the planet, but also institutions, foundations, the Palestinian diaspora, and others, to help us overcome this particularly critical phase in the history of the funding to the agency. So that, I think, is in a nutshell what I can share at the outset, and then very happy to take your questions, obviously.
Thank you very much, Mr. Krähenbühl. I would like to also mention that we have just sent you, before the press conference, the press release about the appeal. It should be in your email boxes. Please respect the embargo until 1 o'clock today. So let's start with John. Can you please introduce yourself?
Over here. Yes, good afternoon. John Zarakostas for The Lancet. I was wondering, can you give us a short summary? What are the implications for delivery of health with the cutbacks from the US? You've mentioned what could be the implications for schools. What are they in terms of healthcare? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. So the system, the clinics and the primary health care that we provide through 140 clinics that are both in Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, the West Bank and Gaza, is absolutely critical in preserving everything from the immunization of children, of which we have incredibly high rate of immunization across the region and have preserved health standards that WHO recognizes every year as being very significant in regional comparison terms. Everything that is a response, and as I said, the focus on both the safe delivery of women who are pregnant, all the prenatal care and postnatal care, which is in very important use and it's a key component in the community. The focus on the non-communicable diseases, which is, of course, diabetes and others, that has a very significant impact on the Palestinian refugee community. So all these parameters are the key elements that would be at risk. Now, it's maybe important here to say that following the announcement by the US of the 60 million, which again, as I said, is a very significant change from last year, the first thing that we did is we called on all of our other existing donors to ask them to advance their contributions to early this year so that we would be in a position to maintain the schools, the clinics, and our other installations open. And it is very positive and very encouraging to have seen how many countries actually responded favorably in that regard. And just, I think, because they do deserve specific credit in that regard, I would want to mention Switzerland, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Germany, the Russian Federation, but also clear decisions in that regard from Belgium, Kuwait, the Netherlands, and Ireland, and other countries are considering similarly to advance their contributions. Now, advancing contributions is extremely important to help us address the first few months, but of course, a shortfall of 300 million can only be addressed with obtaining additional income from other sources over the year. Otherwise, indeed, the healthcare work that we are recognized for could be at risk, and the access, at least, to our clinics could be in question in the future. So this is why we're launching this global campaign and engaging the state community very actively.
Lisa. Here, Voice of America.
Hi, so nice to have you here. Lisa Schlein, Voice of America. President Trump has said that by making this $60 million cut, that this will advance the peace process by bringing the Palestinians to the negotiating table. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think first of all, it is obviously up to the Palestinian leadership to decide how and when they want to make decisions in political terms. I was not mandated for that. But what I can say very clearly is that it has always been, and it will always be, for every humanitarian agency and for any head of agency, as is my case, an imperative to preserve and ensure that humanitarian funding is preserved from politicization. It's very important that humanitarian funding not be caught up in political considerations, because that's the whole point of supporting communities in very difficult conflict environments, is that one doesn't have to agree politically with anybody's leadership, but one is concerned for the well-being, the security, and of course the coverage of needs and rights of communities and of people at large, be they refugees, civilians caught up in conflict or others. And it is very clear that the decision by the United States was not related to our performance. Because I was in Washington in November, had very good meetings with senior representatives in both the State Department and the White House, and there was no reference to an issue related to performance. In other words, this has to be part of the debate that took place around Jerusalem, the vote on Jerusalem at the General Assembly, and I simply note here again that humanitarian funding should be preserved from being tied up with political considerations, on which I don't need to comment further. The political aspects are not related to my own role and the mandate of UNRWA, but it is clear that our work was duly recognized and duly respected, and therefore, again, I emphasize I'm always ready to discuss matters related to our performance, but not related to any political conditionality, because that would be counterproductive for our work.
I'd like to follow up, please. By not having the money to provide what needs to be provided to the Palestinian refugees, will this not exacerbate matters more? You mentioned earlier that the high unemployment rate among youth is a sitting time bomb. I imagine you mean some kind of an explosive situation. Could this lead to another intifada, another war of some kind? And as I say, going back to my original part of this question, that is whether not having the money to provide for the refugees, will this exacerbate matters?
There's no doubt that if no solution is found to the shortfall that was created and that is now very significant, since we've appealed in order to address simply the shortfall for over $500 million when we launched the global campaign Dignity is Priceless, it is clear that if that is not bridged, then there will be increased instability. I cannot now speculate, and I don't wish to speculate, on what forms that instability would take. It can also lead to massive peaceful protests. It doesn't have to be necessarily in any violent form, but there's no doubt that the levels of anxiety in the Palestinian refugee communities are very, very deep. And the issue that Palestinian refugees have been worried about for quite some time is, are we forgotten by the international community? Is our situation being overlooked? And of course, this message on the funding to UNRWA is evidently interpreted in the refugee community as a very concerning development. So I think there's no doubt that I cannot see how it's in the interests of anybody in the region, not the Palestinians, not Egypt, not Jordan, Lebanon, but frankly speaking, not even from an Israeli perspective, to see UNRWA's ability to deliver its services on a predictable basis be affected, with all of the other matters that the Middle East has to deal with in terms of insecurity, radicalization, and other concerns. I think, on the contrary, an investment in the stability of UNRWA's situation and our capacity to deliver the services should be foremost on everyone's mind.
Gabriela. Reforma Mexico.
Yes, thank you. I'm a Mexican journalist, Reforma newspaper. Two questions, please. One, a clarification. If you can repeat just the number of the cuts of the USA from that number, please. And the second question is, if it's not for your performance, what is the reason? Is it political reasons, or do you see the intention to suffocate the people of Palestine?
So on the cuts, so as I said, last year the United States provided $360 million to UNRWA, and this year they've announced $60 million. That's the difference, right? So $300 million difference. We spend 1.2 to 1.3 billion a year, so that's a significant share of the income that we need. The performance-related argument, so it is, since I'm very clear about the fact that it is not performance-related, which doesn't mean that UNRWA never has to ask itself questions about our performance. We do that all the time, of course. We try to improve in education, healthcare, and all the other areas. But the decision was that it's very clear that in the situation that arose from the debate around Jerusalem, the vote in the General Assembly of the United Nations, there was a discussion inside the U.S. administration that included funding to UNRWA in the debate on how to respond to the vote of the General Assembly. And so from that perspective, it has a political dimension that I think should be avoided, because humanitarian organizations should be preserved from having to be caught up in these kind of considerations. I'm always prepared to discuss any other matter related to our performance and how effective or efficient we are, but in this particular case, on the political aspects, there's nothing I can do about it, and therefore it isn't, again, it should not involve UNRWA and funding to UNRWA.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks. Mark Engelhardt, Deutschlandfunk. I'd like to know, since you said that you met with donors earlier and are meeting with them during the day, what kind of sentiments have you collected, and then have you received any concrete signals that donors might not only advance but also top up their funding for this year?
Thanks. So the first reaction is one of very strong solidarity and recognition for UNRWA's role, and I was very impressed today, but also in other meetings that I had, for example, a visit to Tokyo last week, and others, that there's the recognition for UNRWA's achievements, the importance of its mandate, and the need to preserve both its operational capacity and precisely its mandate are very, very strong in the state community. And there's a sense of coming together. Now, of course, I think the most immediate expression by member states of that is what I just listed, which are the countries that have advanced their annual contribution to help us avoid any negative impact on our education system or healthcare system early in the year. But as you alluded to, and that's very correct, at the end of the day, it will require, in one form or another, from a variety of stakeholders, and I don't exclude anybody from this, additional resources. Otherwise, we will hit a very critical point sometime during the year. And therefore, I'm appealing to new funding alliances. We're working with the Secretary General on this very actively and looking to reach out both to, of course, EU and European countries, but also League of Arab States members. But I'm also appealing to diversified funding. Recall here that the Russian Federation contributed and agreed to its first ever multi-annual agreement with the humanitarian organization with UNRWA last year. It's a 5-year commitment, and I think this is very much what we would be looking forward to also in a broader sense. So I'm very positive about developments in our dialogue with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and also the Islamic Development Bank on the establishment of an endowment fund for Palestinian refugees, and at the level of the World Bank for a trust fund. We just need first donors to come forward to now give a first contribution to activate these funds very concretely. So there are actually possibilities, and simply what is happening now with the size of the American reduction is that we will need some of our existing partners to come forward with new proposals. And so I was also in Bern yesterday for senior level meetings with the Swiss, who was one of the first countries to advance funding this year, and there's also a multi-year agreement with UNRWA. So we will see. Of course, a bit early to tell you, how this will play out with all the member states, but at least a very, I think, initial, very positive response and set of reactions.
Moussa Assi Al-Mayadin TV. On entend parler de ces derniers temps par le Premier ministre israélien qui demande la fermeture de l'UNRWA. Qui décide vraiment de sort de l'UNRWA, et comment vous pouvez travailler dans ces conditions, surtout avec la décision américaine de la réduction de la donation? Merci.
Donc la situation est la suivante. Le mandat de l'UNRWA, d'abord, il n'est pas à vendre, pour être clair, et il est fermement ancré à l'Assemblée générale. À la fin de 2016, il y a eu un vote à l'Assemblée générale pour prolonger le mandat de l'UNRWA de 3 ans. C'est la pratique habituelle. Le mandat est prolongé de 3 ans en 3 ans. 167 pays membres de l'Assemblée générale ont voté en faveur de prolonger le mandat de l'UNRWA. Donc il n'y a aucun doute sur le fait que le mandat est fermement protégé à l'Assemblée générale. Maintenant, s'il doit y avoir une discussion sur le mandat, ou sur autre chose, ça ne peut que se passer à l'Assemblée générale. Il n'y a pas d'autre endroit. Et ce n'est pas l'expression d'un pays ou d'un autre qui va définir ça, c'est simplement l'Assemblée générale elle-même qui peut discuter de cette question. Donc ça ne relève même pas de moi. Il ne s'agit pas, je dis toujours aux gens qui veulent parler de cette question avec moi, je leur dis toujours, ce n'est pas avec moi qu'il faut parler de ça. Nous, on reçoit, on a le mandat et on le met en œuvre avec détermination et fierté, parce qu'on le prend très au sérieux. Mais si une question doit avoir lieu sur les questions liées au mandat, ça peut être qu'à l'Assemblée générale. Et en ce sens-là, il faut vraiment séparer, même si je peux comprendre qu'on fasse des liens, la question du mandat en tant que tel et la question du financement nécessaire à la mise en œuvre du mandat. Le mandat en tant que tel n'est pas affecté par les hausses ou les baisses de financement. Par contre, c'est évidemment, ça peut avoir un impact sur notre capacité de mettre en œuvre toutes les activités qui sont liées au mandat lui-même.
Alors oui, Frédéric Burnand, Suisse Info. Juste pour préciser les choses, donc pour l'heure, c'est une annonce de l'administration américaine qu'elle va couper ou c'est déjà une décision effective puisque vous auriez dû recevoir déjà quelque chose ou pas. Et deuxièmement, vous pouvez articuler un chiffre concernant le nombre de pays qui ont déjà versé leur contribution pour toute l'année 2018.
Donc c'est une annonce, mais qui est basée sur une décision de l'administration américaine qui nous a communiqué que pour 2018, le montant de la contribution serait 60 millions. Donc ça, c'est clair, on le prend. Après, évidemment, n'étant pas moi-même un membre de l'administration, je ne peux pas vous dire si à un moment donné dans l'année, ils vont rediscuter de cette question ou pas. Mais aujourd'hui, la situation est claire. Ils nous ont communiqué le montant de 60 millions. Dans le passé, on avait une grande prévisibilité en début d'année sur un montant de l'ordre de 350 millions ou plus. Ça, ce n'est pas le cas pour cette année, donc très clairement, je le prends comme une décision de la part de l'administration américaine. On a, en termes du nombre de pays, on a maintenant 11 pays qui ont déjà fourni, en tout cas concrètement pour les pays pour lesquels les montants sont arrivés sur notre compte, c'est 7, plus 4 qui ont déjà annoncé qu'ils allaient avancer leur contribution aussi, je répète, donc il s'agit de la Suisse, la Finlande, du Danemark, la Suède, la Norvège, de l'Allemagne et de la Fédération de Russie en ce qui concerne les montants qui sont déjà arrivés. Et puis on a la Belgique, le Koweït, les Pays-Bas et l'Irlande qui nous l'ont annoncé et où ça va se passer très prochainement.
Isabelle.
Isabelle Sacco pour l'Agence de presse espagnole. Est-ce que vous pensez que pendant les prochains mois, il y a une possibilité pour vous d'entamer des discussions à plus haut niveau, le plus haut niveau que vous arrivez à avoir, pour faire réfléchir l'administration aux États-Unis sur cette décision et justement les inviter ou les convaincre de la réviser?
Bon, d'abord, il est clair qu'on dispose d'excellents canaux de communication. On a des relations qui sont de très longue durée avec les États-Unis, avec beaucoup de soutien historique, très généreux, donc il faut déjà dire. Si vous imaginez 360 millions, ça c'est quand même de loin la contribution individuelle d'un État la plus importante, et ça a été le cas pendant des années. Donc encore une fois, il faut d'abord reconnaître la valeur et l'importance de cette contribution. On a, avec la nouvelle administration, comme c'est le cas chaque fois qu'il y a une nouvelle administration, tout de suite engagé pour le développement de nouvelles relations avec les acteurs qui pour nous étaient évidemment importants au sein de l'administration. On a eu des visites de l'ambassadrice Nikki Haley qui s'est rendue en Cisjordanie, qui a visité une de nos écoles, qui s'est entretenue avec nos élèves. On a eu Jason Greenblatt qui a fait de même dans une autre école de Cisjordanie l'année passée. J'ai eu des entretiens à Washington en novembre de l'année passée, y compris avec Jared Kushner. Donc je pense les dynamiques qui étaient mises en route pour s'assurer des bons canaux de communication et d'un engagement et d'un dialogue soutenu étaient positifs. Et il faut d'ailleurs dire que les États-Unis l'année passée ont non seulement contribué 300 50 millions, mais ils ont rajouté du financement en cours d'année pour nous aider avec le déficit de l'année passée. Donc c'est évidemment quelque chose qui renforce encore l'idée selon laquelle il y avait une vraie reconnaissance pour le travail que l'UNRWA faisait et qu'il y avait une détermination de soutenir les activités de notre agence. Donc ça, pour moi, la seule chose qui est intervenue depuis, c'est tout le débat autour de Jérusalem. Et là, c'est sûr qu'on va préserver nos canaux de communication. Il est sûr qu'on ne va pas maintenant interrompre le dialogue avec les États-Unis. Il s'agit de poursuivre ce dialogue. Mais c'est aussi important que d'autres États membres, évidemment, interviennent dans ce débat. Et aujourd'hui, alors, le message dans le briefing exécutif était on ne peut plus clair de la préoccupation des États membres de manière générale sur l'impact que ça peut avoir non seulement sur l'UNRWA, mais surtout sur la dignité et le respect des droits des réfugiés de Palestine, en l'absence d'une solution politique, et puis bien entendu sur la stabilité régionale. Donc ça, c'est quelque chose qu'il faudra regarder. On pense que ça fera certainement partie des paramètres qui continueront à être discutés.
Est-ce que... non, Reuters, et puis s'il n'y a plus de questions, je peux encore un follow-up de moi aussi. Ah oui, alors, Reuters, Stéphanie et puis Lionel.
Yeah. Hi, Pierre. Can you say a little bit more on what the current funding from sort of the Gulf countries is to your annual budget, and what your expectations are in terms of whether they will help, fill the gap?
So, actually, there are two things to describe in this. The first thing is that countries in the Gulf have been very significant donors to UNRWA. Saudi Arabia, the third largest. The UAE, in recent years, somewhere between 8th, 9th on average on an annual basis. Kuwait, around 12th. So there's a very significant engagement with UNRWA. Now, what is to be noted is that Gulf countries have tended, and now it's a bit of a generalization, but I just describe it, to focus in sort of as a matter of priority on our projects, and I'll just give you a description of what I mean. Therefore, they've invested a lot, for example, in building or rebuilding schools and clinics, or rebuilding destroyed homes in Gaza after the conflict. That's part of our projects, which are reconstruction or construction related. They have tended, in general, to contribute less directly to our core funding, which is needed to run the schools, run the clinics, our social and relief work, etc. With two exceptions, that was 2015 and 2016. And those were 2 years during which Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, in generous ways, contributed to our core funding. And for the first time, since a decision was made in the 1980s by the League of Arab States to contribute 7.8% of funding to UNRWA's core budget, for the first time that target was actually met in 2015 and 2016. The contribution then dropped last year, 2017, to 3.5%. So what we have there is we have an effort to undertake with member states of the League of Arab States to stabilize, make more predictable the funding to UNRWA. And I think this is definitely a necessity, and it would be, so I both, I'm very grateful for the immense contributions that have been given on reconstruction, which are invaluable for many Palestinian refugees, and in particular also for schools and clinics. But I'm very keen to see an improvement in our partnership on the core funding. That would really be very important, and I hope to be able to raise these issues in my follow-up conversations.
Lionel.
Yes, I had a similar question as Stephanie, but for China. I mean, this is the second largest economy. It's also a country that for a few years has, pretends, to be more important internationally and also through UN specialized agencies. So I would like to know, what is the level of funding of China today? What do you expect for the future? What is your relationship with Chinese? Do you plan to go there this year? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that's obviously a very important relationship that we nurture and wish to develop. I was in Beijing in 2015. I've met the special envoy to the Middle East on many occasions over the last few years. I always take the opportunity to meet the Chinese permanent representatives, be it in New York or here, but also the ambassadors, say, for example, in Syria, in Jordan, obviously the representative in Ramallah, but also the ambassador in Cairo. It's a very important network and relationship to develop. The current level of financial support is clearly low, although it has increased. It's at $350,000, so it's clearly in monetary terms a very modest contribution still. But there are clear signs of a very strong interest in UNRWA, and in view of the fact that you're aware that China has shifted in what was traditionally a bilateral management of its aid portfolio, country to country, which I think can be certainly very clearly defended, and as a reason, but that was the strategy historically, and that I experienced also in my work with the ICRC. Now it has shifted to embrace and include multilateralism in a completely different way. So I think we have a renewed case to make, and I certainly also met the Chinese chargé yesterday here in Geneva to raise this and discuss the opportunities for us, because I do think that there are real opportunities here, exactly like we were pursued with the Russian Federation, for example, or I have done with India as well, which is also a country that has increased its contribution in core funding to UNRWA. Brazil is already a member of our advisory commission, and in that is a significant donor to UNRWA. So we definitely want to work on that, and there's many reasons to do that. I mean, you alluded to the significance of China's role and aspirations, but there's also the fact that our mandate was received from the General Assembly, and so my aspiration and ambition is to ensure that we have a funding base that reflects at least as effectively as we can, the diversity of the membership of the General Assembly. And I note that in the 1950s and 60s, there was a far more diverse set and group of donors that included Asian, Latin American, and African countries in much stronger ways to UNRWA's funding than is the case today. Now, we know things have evolved greatly since. The attention levels to the issue of Palestinian refugees has shifted, the humanitarian system has changed and transformed, but it is for me very significant and important to engage a much broader base of stakeholders at the level of states in the response to our situation.
Yes, Lisa, just want to see if there's anybody who has not spoken yet. No, so I have 3 follow-ups, 4 with John, that we'll try to finish by 45, okay? So I'll start with the follow-up from Moussa, and then Lisa, John, and Gabriela.
Juste une petite clarification. Est-ce que vous avez des promesses pour combler le manque après la décision américaine, donc des promesses d'autres pays? Et comment ce manque d'argent, ça va affecter comment votre travail en général? Merci.
Can't hear, but mais je pense que c'est clair pour M. Krähenbühl.
Voilà, donc la question sur les promesses. Bien sûr, on a des signaux de pays qui sont prêts à s'engager pour un peu plus d'argent. Maintenant, il faut être clair, 300 millions, c'est un énorme montant à combler. Ça ne va pas se résoudre avec des promesses individuelles de quelques millions de plus. Là, il faut une véritable alliance pour combler. Et ça, c'est jamais facile. Je pense que pour aucun pays, c'est simple de tout simplement décider de combler un trou de cette magnitude. Donc, on va engager évidemment les États de l'Union européenne. Je vais aller au Caire discuter avec les membres de la Ligue arabe et on va enchaîner ça jusqu'à avoir probablement une série de consultations à très haut niveau au niveau des États. Donc, c'est une annonce qui est relativement récente. Je ne m'attendais pas encore à voir des annonces définitives. Par exemple, à Tokyo, j'ai une indication très encourageante de la part des Japonais. Pas de montant indiqué pour le moment. Donc je pense qu'aussi les États membres vont se consulter beaucoup dans cette phase pour voir comment réussir à surmonter. En ce qui concerne l'impact, c'est clair que, actuellement, ça nous a amené à devoir prendre toute une série de mesures différentes pour la gestion et la préservation de nos activités, en particulier évidemment demander aux États d'avancer leur financement, ça je l'ai déjà mentionné, mais aussi nous de lancer une campagne globale. La dignité n'a pas de prix, c'est le titre qu'on a donné à ça en français, Dignity is priceless, pour aussi mobiliser l'attention, la solidarité de toutes les personnes de bonne volonté dans le monde, d'avoir les institutions, les fondations, le secteur privé et d'autres nous rejoindre d'une manière beaucoup plus active que ça a été le cas dans le passé. Il faut, quand on a une situation de crise comme ça, il faut aussi prendre les opportunités qui se présentent. Et donc on va poursuivre toutes ces différentes pistes. Évidemment, en cours d'année, on vous informera de nos réussites en détail et on espère trouver des solutions à cette situation.
Lisa.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you have a relationship with the government of Israel? Because my memory may be dim, but after Trump announced the $60 million cut, I sort of remember reading, I'm not sure whether it was President Netanyahu or not, but some government officials in Israel saying that it was a bad idea because, especially when it comes to the health and the educational well-being of children, and that, it impacts upon them. They also have to provide a certain amount of help to the Palestinians, or the whole thing will totally erupt.
So we have a very regular, very open and direct relationship with the Israelis, and that's both at the level of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's as part of our dialogue with the Israeli security forces. It's both at very senior levels and at field operational levels. When the Secretary General visits the region, I'm also associated to the meetings with the Prime Minister and the President of Israel. So there's no doubt about that engagement. There's also a very clear recognition on the side of Israeli stakeholders of the value of UNRWA's humanitarian work. There's often very challenging discussions around the nature of our mandate and other aspects that are maybe more related to the fact that the UNRWA exists to serve one specific community, which are Palestinian refugees, and that's always a matter of debate. So it's not surprising that we don't always agree with Israel in the assessments of humanitarian conditions, for example, on Gaza and others. But I must also say that, as you pointed out, there were several public statements made by senior officials in Israel to the effect that cutting and reducing funding to UNRWA is not good for regional stability and therefore a matter of concern to them. Now, you hear very different things coming in that regard, but there is also that part of the recognition which I think is important for anyone to listen to. And in 2015, when we almost had to postpone the beginning of our school year in relation to an earlier funding crisis of a much smaller magnitude than this year's, it was clear that everybody in the region, Palestinians, Jordanians, Lebanese, but also Israelis, were regularly in contact with us to understand what the impact of a possible postponement of the school year would be. Everybody being very concerned about increased instability.
Gabriela, John, and we'll wrap up. Gabriela.
Yes. Is it after all the things that you said? Is it fair to say that this was the direct consequence of the vote? This reaction of the USA, the vote in the General Assembly, and personally, do you feel disappointed? You had a good channel of communication, you just said, with the government, USA government. So are you disappointed? Is this, in your career, humanitarian career, is it normal to cut 300 million like this? And another question, are they losing something? Palestinians are going to lose. But the USA, are they losing something with this?
So the first thing is, in order to lose 300 million, you have to also recognize that those were the amounts that were previously contributed. So that's really very important. For almost 70 years, the US has been, if not at every year, the single largest, but very consistently the largest donor to UNRWA. So of course, Palestinian refugees themselves is you never give up. So UNRWA will not give up. And we will take this as a huge challenge, which it is, but we'll also take it as the opportunity to reach out and to find new paths and to try and overcome this, which is, of course, a very serious crisis, but we will also take forward very serious and ambitious strategies to try and overcome this. It's not the first time in our long and proud history that we face challenges of this nature, but it is, in financial terms, the most serious financial crisis ever in the history of this agency.
Last question, John.
Yes, I was wondering, can you give us some details? I understand there's been recently a decision by the Israeli High Court that is putting in jeopardy possibly the demolition of a school built with European aid funds, and there is concern among the European NGO community, and that there could be more schools at risk of demolition.
Look, I think that's a regular concern on the side of the EU of investing money into projects that are then affected by actions taken by the occupying power. I'll let the European Union speak to that effect. I think the specific case you're referring to is a school in the Bedouin community of Khan al-Ahmar. That's, of course, something that UNRWA follows very closely because those are actually Palestinian refugees. It's a Bedouin community that faces the risk of a forcible transfer from the location where it is currently, and that would involve, indeed, the possibility of a destruction and a demolition of a school that was specifically built for that community. Not built by us, but built by the funds, including funds of the European Union. So this is a position on which we have always taken very clear stand. This community has a right to be where it is. It was already displaced once before, and therefore it should be a matter of a choice for it to remain, where it is, also consistent with the Bedouin community's traditions and practices. So forced relocation in a situation of occupation would be a very significant and severe issue. We've raised these issues with the Israelis many times, both privately and publicly. So I think our position on that is a matter of public record.
Thank you very, very much. Ça va? Ça va?
Excuse me.
It really should. He really has to leave.
Does Israel contribute in any form, in finance or in kind, to the work of UNRWA? No. Okay.
Thank you very, very much. I remind you of the 1 p.m. embargo. Thank you for being with us. Bon appétit.